They robbed a train in broad daylight, and the train behaved as if it was expecting them. This was not a nighttime ambush. There was no fog, no isolation, no cover. It happened under a clear sky, in full view of workers, passengers, and nearby settlements. And somehow it worked. This is a story of a daylight train robbery that made no sense, and why the official explanation only works if you stop asking questions. At the time, train robberies were already a known risk in the American West, but they followed patterns. They relied on darkness, remote terrain, or forced stops in narrow passes where resistance was limited. Daylight changed everything. Visibility favored the railroad. Witnesses multiplied. Response time shortened, which is why this robbery immediately stood out. According to the accepted historical account, a small group of armed men boarded or stopped a freight train during normal operating hours. They moved quickly, issued clear instructions, collected valuables, and escaped before any effective response could be organized. No prolonged gunfight, no serious injuries, minimal resistance. The story has often been told as an example of boldness. Criminals exploiting surprise rather than secrecy. But that explanation ignores the conditions that made surprise almost impossible. The train was not traveling through wilderness. Sections of the track were routinely monitored. Railway employees were present along the route. Schedules were known, but security measures were supposed to adapt to risk. Yet on this day, they didn't. Witnesses later described something unusual. The train slowed earlier than expected. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to make boarding or interception easier. Engineers did not immediately attempt evasive action. Guards, who were listed on manifests, were either absent or positioned in ways that rendered them ineffective. These details are often treated as coincidence. They shouldn't be. Railroads were not careless institutions. They were among the most organized systems of the frontier. Delays, slowdowns, and staffing decisions followed procedure, especially in daylight. Multiple accounts note that the robbers appeared calm. They knew where to go, which cars mattered, which ones didn't. They did not search randomly. They did not linger. This suggests preparation. But preparation alone doesn't explain the lack of resistance. Passengers complied. Crew members followed instructions. No immediate attempt was made to alert nearby stations. No pursuit began until long after the robbers had vanished. The official explanation attributes this to fear and confusion. That explanation works, briefly, until it's placed alongside the timeline. The gap between the robbery and the response was not measured in seconds. It was measured in opportunities missed. Signals that could have been sent, trains that could have been redirected, towns that could have been warned. None were. When authorities finally reacted, the language used in reports was strangely restrained. The event was described as efficient, brief, and non-disruptive. Emphasis was placed on the absence of casualties rather than the breach itself. It was as if the system wanted credit for surviving the robbery more than it wanted to explain how it happened. Even the pursuit feels symbolic. Searches focus on expected escape routes, long after any realistic chance of interception had passed. Suspects were described vaguely. No arrests directly tied to the incident were secured. The robbers disappeared cleanly, which raises the most uncomfortable question of all. How did a crime that violated every assumption about train security succeed so smoothly? Because daylight does not favor criminals. It favors systems. For this robbery to work, multiple layers of protection had to fail or step aside. At the same time, the train had to slow. The guards had to be ineffective or absent. The response had to be delayed. The witnesses had to agree on just enough to close the story. The official narrative asks us to believe this alignment was accidental, that boldness alone carried the day. But boldness does not explain procedure. It does not explain timing. It does not explain silence. And it does not explain why, afterward, no one seemed eager to reconstruct the failure in detail. The more closely this robbery is examined, the less it looks like an interruption, and the more it begins to resemble something else. Something allowed, something anticipated, something that the system absorbed rather than confronted. And that is where the comfortable version of the story ends. Because the next step is not about the robbers. It's about the train, and what it did and didn't do when the daylight left nowhere to hide. Before we continue, a brief reminder: if you value investigations that slow down instead of simplifying, consider leaving a like and subscribing. It helps keep stories examined instead of quietly closed. Now, the comfortable version fails. Daylight removes excuses. In the official account, the robbery succeeds because of surprise, speed, and intimidation. A bold crew exploited a moment. Fear did the rest. But fear does not override procedure. Railroads in this period operated by rules that existed precisely to prevent this scenario. Trains did not slow without cause. Engineers were trained to maintain speed through populated areas unless signaled. Guards were assigned positions for visibility and deterrence. Communication protocols existed to alert nearby stations. For a daylight robbery to unfold smoothly, multiple safeguards had to fail at the same time or be bypassed. The first crack is a slowdown. Witnesses consistently mention that the train reduced speed earlier than expected, not in response to an obstacle, not to a signal, just enough to make access easier. Engineers later described routine conditions: no emergency, no irregularity. That explanation asks us to believe the most consequential decision of the event was also the least examined. The second crack is the guards. Manifests list armed personnel. Reports later minimize their presence or describe them as ineffective. Weapons are mentioned but not used. Positions are described but not enforced. The absence of resistance is framed as restraint. Restraint is not protocol. Deterrence is. The third crack is timing. Daylight compresses response windows. Stations are staffed. Workers are awake. Lines of sight are clear. Signals can be sent immediately. They weren't. Not promptly. Not decisively. Not with urgency. The gap between the robbery and the response is where the story should focus. Instead, it slides past it. Reports emphasize how quickly the robbers left, not how slowly the system reacted. That choice matters. The fourth crack is knowledge. The robbers moved with confidence. They targeted specific cars. They avoided others. They did not search blindly. They did not hesitate. That suggests information. Information about cargo placement, about staffing, about schedules, about when resistance would be minimal. Boldness alone does not provide that. The fifth crack is language. After the event, descriptions soften. The robbery is clean, efficient, non-disruptive. Casualties are highlighted by their absence. The breach itself is minimized. It reads less like an alarm and more like a reassurance, as if the system were eager to move on. The sixth crack is pursuit. Searches began after routes had cooled. Suspects were generic. Leads evaporated. No arrests tied conclusively to the incident followed. The robbers disappear into the story, not into custody. This is explained as frontier reality. But this was not wilderness. This was daylight, infrastructure, people, visibility. The final crack is a question no report answers. Why was there no reconstruction? No procedural review? No public accounting of failures? No clear explanation of what went wrong? When systems fail visibly, they usually respond loudly. Here, the response was quiet. That silence suggests the possibility that nothing went wrong in the way the reports imply. Because if this robbery was not a breach, but a pass-through, if delays, absences, and hesitations align by design rather than accident, then investigation becomes dangerous. It points inward, toward decisions, toward permissions, toward benefits not shared with the public. The story wants you to focus on the men with guns, but the daylight keeps pulling your eyes back to the train, to what it did, to what it didn't do, to how smoothly the event fit into the day. Daylight is unforgiving. It doesn't hide mistakes. It exposes intent. And that is why this robbery still resists explanation, not because it was daring, but because it behaved like something expected. And once you consider that, the question changes. Not how they pulled it off, but why the system let them. The records do not answer that. They don't deny it either. They simply stop. The train continued. Schedules resumed. Reports closed. And the daylight moved on, leaving no shadow large enough to hold the truth. That silence is the ending, not resolution, not justice, just continuity. And continuity, when protected at all costs, tells you exactly what mattered most. If you value investigations that slow down instead of simplifying, consider leaving a like and subscribing. It helps keep stories examined instead of quietly closed.